Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The morning Danny refused breakfast, Victor Lyons knew something had shifted. His 7-year-old son sat at the kitchen table, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate with the mechanical movements of someone going through motions. Outside their Baltimore row house, September rain drummed against the windows, but the real storm was brewing inside Victor's gut. Not hungry, buddy. Victor kept his tone light, though his investigator's instincts, honed over 12 years with the city's Child Advocacy Center, were screaming. Danny shook his head, dark curls falling across his forehead. The kid looked pale, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Before the last visit to Grandpa Reggie's estate in Towson, Alexis swept into the kitchen, already dressed in her real estate agent blazer, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Mrs. Chun, I can show you the property this afternoon." She covered the mouthpiece. "Victor, Dad's picking up Danny at 3. I've got showings until 6. Victor's coffee turned bitter in his mouth. "Actually, I was thinking. Can't reschedule, babe. Dad's been asking to spend time with Danny all week." She returned to her call, heels clicking toward the door. "Sorry, Mrs. Chun, what were you saying about the square footage?" 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since Victor first noticed the change. Danny used to love his grandfather, Reginald Moran, retired federal judge, pillar of Baltimore's legal community, owner of a sprawling property that included horses, a pool, and what Danny had once called the best game room ever. But lately, the boy's enthusiasm had curdled into something else. Something that made him wet the bed again after 2 years of dry nights. Something that put that hollow look in his eyes. Victor had tried talking to Alexis. She'd laughed it off. "Danny's just being dramatic. You know how kids are at this age, pushing boundaries, testing us. Dad spoils him rotten, probably lets him stay up too late watching movies." But Victor knew the difference between a sugar crash and trauma. He'd spent over a decade interviewing children, reading the micro-expressions that screamed what words couldn't say. And Danny's face, whenever Reginald's name came up, showed the same haunted quality Victor had seen in hundreds of case files. He'd started digging 3 days ago, quietly, carefully, because Reginald Moran wasn't just any grandfather. He was connected. 30 years on the federal bench, appointed by presidents, photographed with senators. His poker nights included the police commissioner, the DA, half the city's power players. You didn't make accusations against a man like that without ironclad proof. Victor had learned young that the world didn't give a damn about gut feelings. Growing up in West Baltimore, watching his own mother ignored when she reported his stepfather's abuse, seeing case after case dismissed for insufficient evidence, it had taught him that righteous anger meant nothing without leverage. So he'd become methodical, patient, the kind of investigator who built cases brick by brick until the walls were too high to climb. He'd started with the property records. Reginald's Towson estate sat on 12 acres, the main house a Georgian colonial that Alexis had grown up in. But there were outbuildings too. A converted carriage house. The old stable, renovated 5 years ago. And something that hadn't been there on county blueprints until 2019, a wine cellar addition that seemed unusually large for a man who preferred bourbon. "Daddy." Victor snapped back to the present. Danny was looking at him with those enormous brown eyes, his mother's eyes, pleading. "What's up, champ? Do I have to go to Grandpa's?" Alexis had already left. They were alone. Victor crouched beside his son's chair, heart hammering. "Did something happen there, Danny? Something that made you uncomfortable?" The boy's face shuddered immediately, that blank expression Victor had seen 1,000 times before. The look of a child who'd been told secrets were important, that telling would make bad things happen, that nobody would believe them anyway. "It's okay," Danny whispered. "Grandpa says big boys are brave." Every instinct told Victor to cancel. To keep Danny home, consequences be damned. But he'd been planning for this moment. He'd spent 72 hours preparing, and today was the day everything had to align perfectly. Because Victor had finally found the pattern. It had taken cross-referencing decades of court records, but he'd found it. 8 cases over Reginald's career where child abuse charges had been dismissed on technicalities. Cases where Reginald had been the presiding judge. 8 families who tried to report, tried to fight, only to see their cases evaporate. And when Victor had tracked down those families, 3 had mentioned the same detail. Their children had been befriended by respected community members who'd taken them to special places. Then yesterday, While Alexis was out showing houses, Victor had picked Danny up from school early. He'd driven past Reginald's estate, parking on the wooded access road that bordered the property. Through binoculars, he'd watched, and he'd seen Reginald's car return from somewhere, mud on the tires despite the dry weather, followed by a second vehicle, a black Lincoln Town car registered to Judge Herbert Kim, another retired federal judge, one of Reginald's poker buddies. Two elderly judges, visiting somewhere muddy in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, somewhere off property, because the estate grounds were all paved or manicured lawn. Victor had spent last night poring over topographical maps. There was old county land behind Reginald's property, a defunct recreation area that had been closed since the 70s, officially abandoned. But the access road showed fresh tire tracks. At 2:45 p.m., Victor pulled out his phone and opened the tracking app he'd installed 2 days ago. Then he removed a small device from his desk drawer, a GPS tracker no bigger than a quarter, disguised as a toy car. He'd bought it from a contact who supplied surveillance equipment to private investigators, the kind of tech that wasn't exactly legal but wasn't exactly traceable either. "Hey, Danny, come here for a second." His son appeared in the doorway, already wearing his jacket, resignation written across his small face. Victor knelt down and showed him the tracker. "This is a special toy, buddy. It looks like a Hot Wheels car, see? But it's also like a superhero gadget." He pressed the tiny button on the underside. "If anything happens that makes you scared or uncomfortable, anything at all, you just press this button 3 times fast. Can you do that?" Danny took the metal car, turning it over in his small hands. "What happens when I press it?" "It sends me a signal. Like the bat signal, but secret. And I'll come get you immediately. No matter what anyone says, no matter who tells you it's okay or that you need to keep secrets, you press this if you need me. Even if Grandpa says not to." Victor's blood ran cold, but he kept his voice steady. "Especially then, champ. Grown-ups shouldn't ask kids to keep secrets from their parents. That's not how love works." Danny nodded slowly, slipping the tracker into his pocket. Some color had returned to his face. Having a secret weapon, even a small one, gave children back a measure of control. The doorbell rang at precisely 3 o'clock. Victor opened it to find Reginald Moran on the stoop, silver-haired and distinguished in his camel overcoat, smile warm and practiced. At 72, he maintained the bearing of his years on the bench, straight-backed, clear-eyed, radiating authority. "Victor, good to see you. Ready for our adventure, Danny boy?" Danny didn't move. He stood frozen halfway down the hallway, face going pale again. "Come on now." Reginald's voice held gentle reproach. "We've got a fun afternoon planned. Judge Kim is bringing his model trains to show you. You love trains." "I want to stay home," Danny said quietly. Reginald laughed, but Victor caught the flash of irritation in his eyes. "Now, don't be silly. We've been planning this all week." He looked at Victor. "Kids, am I right? Alexis mentioned he's been in a mood lately." Victor felt Danny's small hand grip his leg. The boy was trembling. "Actually, Reggie, maybe we should." "Nonsense." Reginald stepped inside uninvited, moving toward Danny with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Your mother would be very disappointed if you misbehaved, young man. We don't want to upset her, do we? She works very hard." It was subtle, the threat wrapped in concern, but Victor heard it clearly. So did Danny. The boy's trembling increased. "Daddy." The word came out small and desperate. Victor made his decision. He'd spent 3 days preparing for this moment, setting everything in motion. But he couldn't force his child into that car, not with Danny looking at him like he was being fed to wolves. He crouched down and pulled Danny into a hug, whispering in his ear, "Remember what I gave you. You're braver than you know, and I'm going to fix this. I promise. But I need you to be strong for just a little while longer." Then, loud enough for Reginald to hear, "You know what, champ? If you really don't want to go." "Victor." Reginald's voice sharpened. "We've discussed this. Danny needs to learn that he can't manipulate situations with tantrums. Alexis and I agreed. Daddy, last time he drove me to the bad place." Danny's voice rose to a shout, tears streaming. "The place with the basement. Let me go home. Please." The words hung in the air like a detonation. Reginald's face smoothed into perfect, practiced concern. "See? This is exactly what I mean. Pure drama. Honestly, Victor, you're a child advocate. You should know better than to encourage this kind of acting out." But Victor was watching Reginald's hands. They'd clenched, knuckles white, before the judge consciously relaxed them. Fear masked as frustration. "He's dramatic," Victor said slowly, playing the role. Like his father. He pulled out the tracker, making a show of it looking like a simple toy car. "Hey buddy, why don't you take this with you? Something to play with in Grandpa's car." Danny grabbed it like a lifeline, clutching it to his chest. Reginald barely glanced at it, already moving toward the door. "Come along, Danny. We're running late." Victor met his son's eyes one last time. Danny was crying, but he nodded, understanding what wasn't being said, that his father had a plan, that the tracker was more than a toy, that help would come. The boy climbed into Reginald's Mercedes with the mechanical compliance of the defeated. As the car pulled away, Victor stood on the stoop, watching until it disappeared around the corner. Then he was moving. He'd already positioned his own car 3 blocks away. His go-bag sat in the trunk, camera equipment, lock picks, the second GPS tracker that would now follow Reginald's Mercedes to wherever the bad place was. He'd mapped every back road within 20 miles. He had bolt cutters for gates, a glass punch for windows, and the phone number for exactly one person he trusted at the FBI, Jay Heath, a friend from college who owed him a favor and didn't know Reginald Moran a damn thing. But most importantly, he had coordinates. 2 days ago, Victor had done something that could cost him his job and possibly his freedom. He'd used his credentials at the Child Advocacy Center to access the National Crime Information Center database. He'd searched for patterns, missing children reports, unsolved cases, anything connected to the area around Reginald's property. And he'd found something that had made his stomach drop. 15 years ago, a boy named Tommy Villanueva had disappeared during a camping trip near the old recreation area. The case had gone cold within weeks. The lead investigator? A young detective named Luther Walsh, who'd retired early 3 years later and now worked private security for Reginald Moran's law firm. Victor had spent yesterday tracking down Tommy's mother, Kelly Villanueva. She'd answered the door of her modest apartment looking like grief had carved her hollow. But when Victor explained who he was, when he mentioned Reginald Moran's name, her eyes had sharpened. "They told me I was crazy," she'd said. "That my Tommy just wandered off. But he was a smart boy. He wouldn't have gone into those woods alone." She'd grabbed Victor's arm. Judge Moran was one of the search party volunteers. He was so kind, so concerned. But something about the way he looked at me. She'd shuddered. Like he was studying me. Like he wanted to see how much I suspected. Now, as Victor climbed into his car and activated the tracking app, he watched the blinking that represented his son moving through Baltimore streets. Not toward Towson and Reginald's estate. Toward the old county access road. Toward the abandoned recreation area. His phone buzzed. A text from Alexis. "Dad says you were weird about the pickup. Everything okay?" Victor's jaw clenched. She'd been Reginald's daughter for 34 years, his wife for 9. He'd tried to see her as a victim too, someone kept in deliberate ignorance. But lately he'd started wondering. The way she always had excuses. The way she dismissed Danny's behavior. The way she'd gotten angry when Victor suggested therapy for their son. "All good," he texted back. "Just worried about Danny's mood. Call you later." The tracker showed Reginald's car turning off the main road. Victor gave them a 5-minute head start, then followed. He knew these roads. He'd driven them a dozen times this week, memorizing every turn, every sight line, every place to hide a vehicle. His phone was recording. Everything from this point forward would be documented. Because Victor had learned the hard way that the truth meant nothing if you couldn't prove it. And men like Reginald Moran, men with power, with connections, with 30 years of covering their tracks, they didn't fall easy. But they did fall. Everyone had a weakness. Everyone made mistakes. And Victor Lyons had built a career on finding them. The GPS that stopped moving. Victor checked the coordinates against his map. Deep in the old recreation area, past the main structures, near what had once been a caretaker's cottage. The building wasn't on any recent county maps, but it was on a surveyor's report from 1973, before the area had been closed down. Victor parked his car half a mile away, hidden in an overgrown maintenance area. He grabbed his bag and started moving through the woods, using the skills he'd learned during his brief stint in the Army before college. Low and quiet, using trees for cover, eyes constantly scanning. His phone buzzed. Not a call, the tracker alert. Danny had pressed the button. 3 times, fast. The distress signal. Victor's calm shattered into pure adrenaline. He abandoned stealth for speed, crashing through undergrowth. Every second counted. Every second Danny was in that place. He broke through the tree line and saw it. The cottage was larger than he'd expected, its windows covered with boards that looked new despite the building's decrepit exterior. 2 cars in the clearing, Reginald's Mercedes and the black Lincoln Town car. No one outside. They were all inside. With his son. Victor's hand went to his phone, pulling up Jay Heath's number. But before he could dial, he heard it. A scream. High and terrified, and unmistakably Danny's voice. Then it cut off abruptly. Victor's vision tunneled. Every piece of his carefully constructed plan evaporated. He was moving toward the cottage, no longer the methodical investigator, but a father whose child was in danger. His hand found the glass punch in his bag, his other hand already reaching for the door. It opened. Reginald Moran stood in the doorway, bathed in the cottage's dim light. He wasn't alone. Behind him, Victor could see Judge Herbert Kim, and a third man he recognized from photos, Luther Walsh, the detective who'd investigated Tommy Villanueva's disappearance. But what stopped Victor cold wasn't the men. It was Reginald's smile. "Hello, Victor," the old judge said pleasantly. "We've been expecting you." And Victor realized, with the sick certainty of a trap snapping shut, that he'd made a terrible mistake. The cottage's interior was nothing like Victor had imagined. No chains, no obvious horror. Instead, it looked like someone's idea of a gentleman's club, leather furniture, a bar in the corner, rich wood paneling. Civilized. Almost cozy. Except for the door at the back. Heavy steel, incongruous with the rest of the decor. And the silence behind it. "Where's my son?" Victor's voice came out steady despite his hammering heart. "Safe," Reginald said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs. "Please sit. We should talk." "I'm not sitting down. I'm taking Danny and leaving." Herbert Kim chuckled, a wet sound that made Victor's skin crawl. He was older than Reginald, easily 80, with liver-spotted hands and rheumy eyes. "I don't think you understand your situation, Mr. Lyons." Luther Walsh moved to block the exit. He was younger, maybe 55, with the build of someone who'd stayed in shape. Ex-military bearing. A cop who'd learned to hurt people legally, and then found ways to do it without the badge. Victor's mind raced. He'd sent his location to Jay Heath in a timed email, set to deploy if he didn't check in within 2 hours. But 2 hours was a lifetime. And these men, they'd been waiting for him. Which meant they'd known he was investigating. Known he'd follow Danny. "How long have you known?" he asked, buying time. Reginald settled into a chair, crossing his legs with the casual air of a man in complete control. "About a week." "You're good, Victor, I'll give you credit. Very careful. But you made a mistake when you accessed NCIC to search for Tommy Villanueva. Your colleague, Sean Dillon? The one who manages the center's database access? He's a friend of mine. Plays poker at my house twice a month." Victor's stomach dropped. Sean, the assistant director who'd always seemed too eager to please, too quick to dismiss cases against prominent citizens. "He's been quite helpful over the years," Reginald continued. "Flagging concerning inquiries, making sure certain files don't get too much attention. When he told me you'd pulled Tommy's case, along with 8 others I presided over, well," he spread his hands. "I knew it was only a matter of time. So you used my son as bait. We used your paranoia." Herbert Kim poured himself a drink from the bar. "You suspected, but you had no proof. So you did exactly what we expected, gave Danny that adorable little tracker, and followed him here. Now we have you on multiple crimes. Illegal surveillance, trespassing, breaking and entering. Once you used that glass punch you've got in your bag." He sipped his bourbon. "Add in some false accusations against a respected federal judge, maybe some evidence of mental instability and obsessive personality. The story writes itself," Luther Walsh added. "Troubled investigator, history of paranoid behavior, becomes convinced his son is being abused. Plants false evidence, tries to frame innocent men. Tragic, really." Victor forced himself to breathe. They were playing a game they'd clearly played before: intimidation, gaslighting, using the system itself as a weapon. How many others had sat where he was sitting now? How many parents had they broken this way? "Danny screamed," he said quietly. "I heard him." "Children can be very dramatic," Reginald said, "especially when coached by an unstable parent. But don't worry, we have ways of calming them down. Danny's fine. A little frightened, perhaps, but unharmed. For now." The threat was explicit. Victor's hands clenched into fists. "You're wondering if you can take us," Luther observed. "3 old men. One of them still fit enough to make you work for it. You're thinking about that steel door, getting to Danny, fighting your way out." He smiled. "Go ahead. Try. It'll make our story even more convincing when we claim self-defense. We're reasonable men, Victor." Reginald leaned forward. "We don't want anyone getting hurt. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to admit you've been under stress, that your concerns about Danny were misplaced, that you made a terrible mistake. You'll resign from the center, get some help, be a better husband to my daughter. And Danny," he paused, "Danny will learn to be less dramatic. We'll help him with that. Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," Herbert said mildly. "Though it's messier. Better for everyone if you simply cooperate." Victor's mind was working overtime. They were right. He'd walked into their trap. But they'd made assumptions. They'd assumed he was alone. They'd assumed he hadn't prepared for the possibility of being caught. They'd assumed, like so many arrogant men before them, that they were the smartest people in the room. They'd assumed Victor Lyons would break the way others had broken. "Can I at least see my son?" he asked. "Make sure he's okay?" Reginald considered. "I suppose there's no harm." Luther, open the door." Walsh moved to the steel door, producing a key from his pocket. As it swung open, Victor braced himself for horror. What he saw was worse. The room beyond was carpeted, climate-controlled, filled with toys and games, and a large television. There was even a small bed in the corner. It looked like a playroom, like someone had tried to create a space children would enjoy. Danny sat on the floor, surrounded by action figures. He looked up when the door opened, and Victor saw it. That blank expression again, the shutdown of emotion. His son had learned to cope by going somewhere else in his head. "Hey, champ," Victor said, keeping his voice gentle. "Hi, Daddy." Danny's voice was flat. "Grandpa says I have to stay here for a while, until I learn my lesson about telling stories." "And what lesson is that, buddy?" "That sometimes secrets are good. That grown-ups know best." Victor's heart shattered, but he kept his face calm, nodded like he understood. "Can I give you a hug?" Danny stood, walked over mechanically. Victor pulled him close, and in that moment, whispered directly into his ear, "Trust me. Be ready to run when I say." He felt Danny's slight nod against his chest. "All right," Reginald said. "That's enough. Luther, take Danny back inside. Victor and I need to finish our discussion." Walsh moved to separate them, but Victor had already released Danny, stepping back with his hands visible, playing compliant. For now, the steel door closed. Victor heard the lock click, and something inside him, the last piece of restraint that had kept him civilized, finally snapped. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "You think because you've played this game before, because you've gotten away with it for years, that you're untouchable." "We don't think," Herbert said. "We know. Here's what you don't know." Victor pulled out his phone. "This entire conversation has been live-streaming to a secure server. Every word, every threat, every admission you've made. It's already uploaded, already backed up in 3 separate locations." Reginald's smile didn't waver, but Victor saw the calculation in his eyes. Illegally obtained evidence. Inadmissible. In court, maybe, but not in the court of public opinion. Not when I release it to every news outlet in the state. Not when it's accompanied by the evidence I've been gathering for 3 weeks. Property records, financials, the pattern of dismissed cases, testimony from Tommy Villanueva's mother. "You're bluffing," Luther said, but his hand had moved to his jacket, where he probably kept a gun. "Am I?" Victor's thumb hovered over his phone. "You mentioned Sean Dillon. What you don't know is that I suspected him weeks ago. So I didn't just access those files. I made copies first, sent them to secure storage outside the center's servers. You can't erase what you can't access." "This is foolish, Victor." Reginald stood, his mask of civility finally cracking. "You're not thinking clearly. Even if you had evidence, which I doubt, do you really think you can fight us? We have resources, connections, decades of carefully constructed reputations. You're one man with conspiracy theories and an agenda. One man who spent 12 years learning exactly how your kind operates." Victor's voice was ice. "You use shame as a weapon. You count on victims being too scared to speak, on parents being too desperate to risk their reputations. You hide behind institutional power and respectability. But here's the thing, Reginald, I don't care about my reputation. I don't care about my career. I care about my son. And I'm not one of the parents you've broken before. Then you're a fool, Herbert spat. We'll destroy you. You, your career, your marriage. My marriage. Victor laughed, and it was a bitter sound. My wife has been covering for you. Making excuses, dismissing Danny's trauma. Did she know, Reginald? Did your daughter know what you are? Something flickered in Reginald's eyes. Guilt? Fear? Alexis is innocent. She believes what I've told her. Does she? Or has she just chosen not to see? Victor shook his head. Doesn't matter now. He checked his watch. 90 seconds. My fail-safe email goes out. Everything I've gathered, including this recording, to 15 different recipients. Journalists, federal prosecutors, victims advocacy groups. Even if you kill me right here, right now, you can't stop it. You're lying. But Reginald's voice had lost its certainty. Am I? Victor smiled. There's one way to find out. Wait 90 seconds. Luther Walsh pulled his gun. We should end this now. And confirm everything. Victor said calmly, though his heart was racing. Shoot me. And that recording shows 3 men threatening, then murdering, a father trying to rescue his son. Good luck explaining that away. The seconds ticked by. 60. 50. Reginald was calculating. Victor could see it. Weighing options, considering angles. But for the first time in decades, the judge who'd always held all the cards was facing a hand he couldn't win. Stop the email, Reginald said finally. We can negotiate. No. Victor's voice was absolute. No negotiation. No deals. You open that door, you let Danny go, and you wait for the police to arrive. Those are your only options. The police? Herbert laughed. Half the department drinks at my club. You think? I'm not calling the Baltimore PD, Victor interrupted. I'm calling the FBI. Special Agent Jay Heath, Public Corruption Division. He's been waiting for my signal. And yes, before you ask, he knows everything. He has copies of the evidence. This isn't a lone crusader situation, gentlemen. This is a federal investigation that's been building for 3 weeks, and you're all caught in the middle of it. It was partially a bluff. Jay knew some of it, enough to act on if something happened to Victor. But the full scope, the complete investigation, that existed mostly in Victor's files and the recordings he'd made. Still, the bluff worked. He saw it in their faces, the calculation changing. You've made a mistake, Reginald said, but his voice had lost its power. Even if everything you say is true, even if the FBI investigates, we're old men, Victor. I'm 72. Herbert is 81. The legal process takes years. We might not even live long enough to see a courtroom. I know, Victor said. And that's why I'm not relying on the courts. He pressed a button on his phone. Not the email failsafe. That was already sent, already en route to its recipients. This was something else. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Victor moved. He'd memorized the room's layout during their conversation, counted steps, noted positions. He hit Luther Walsh first, a strike to the gun hand that sent the weapon clattering across the floor. Then he was moving toward the steel door, the glass punch in his other hand, praying his aim was true in the dark. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in red. Luther was on the ground, clutching his wrist. Herbert had stumbled against the bar. And Reginald stood between Victor and the steel door, something dark and heavy in his hand. The gun Luther had dropped. You've ruined everything, the old judge said. And for the first time, Victor saw the monster beneath the mask. Raw hatred, stripped of civility. 30 years of careful work. 30 years of being untouchable. And you've destroyed it in 3 weeks. Good, Victor said. The gun rose. Victor had time to think that maybe he'd miscalculated, that maybe his bluff about Jay Heath would be tested sooner than he'd hoped, that maybe Danny would have to grow up without a father. Then the door burst open. Not the steel door, the entrance. FBI agents in tactical gear flooded the room, weapons drawn, voices overlapping in commands. Victor dropped to the floor, hands visible, exactly as he'd been instructed during his conversations with Jay Heath. Federal agents. Drop the weapon. Drop it now. Reginald Moran, retired federal judge, stood frozen. The gun wavered in his hand. For a moment, Victor thought the old man might actually shoot, might go down in a blaze that would at least spare him the humiliation of trial. Then the gun dropped. Reginald's shoulders sagged. And Victor knew. It was over. Almost. Agent Jay Heath pulled Victor aside while other agents secured Reginald, Herbert, and Luther. You cut that close, he said. When you triggered the panic signal, we were still 5 minutes out. Had to get their confession on tape, Victor said. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. The recording. We got it. Crystal clear. Jay nodded toward the steel door. We need to get your son out of there. It took 2 agents and a plasma cutter to breach the lock. Apparently, Reginald had spared no expense on security. When the door finally opened, Victor rushed in to find Danny exactly where he'd left him, sitting among the toys with that terrible blank expression. Hey, champ. Victor scooped his son into his arms. It's over. We're going home. Danny buried his face in Victor's neck. Are the bad men going away? Yeah, buddy. They're going away for a long time. Even Grandpa. Victor's heart broke at the question, the confusion in a child's voice trying to reconcile the grandfather he'd once loved with the monster who'd hurt him. Even Grandpa. Outside, as they loaded Reginald into a federal vehicle, Alexis's car pulled up. Victor's wife emerged, face pale, eyes wide with incomprehension. She'd received the emails, seen the evidence, and now faced the collapse of everything she'd believed about her father. Victor, she started. Not now. He held Danny tighter. We need to get him to a hospital, get him checked out. Then we need to talk. Really talk. About what you knew and what you chose not to see. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't. Then why did you always make excuses? Victor's voice was harder than he'd ever used with her. Why did you dismiss every sign? Why did you fight me when I tried to protect our son? Alexis had no answer. She stood there, watching as her father was driven away, as the family's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Victor felt a moment of pity for her. But only a moment. Because Danny was what mattered. Getting him help, getting him healing, making sure the trauma didn't define his entire life. Jay approached with a tablet. We found more, he said quietly. Behind that steel door, there's a staircase. Goes down to a bunker. Victor, there are files. Videos. Going back decades. Victor closed his eyes. How many? We're still counting. But at least 40 children, based on preliminary review. Jay's voice was tight, with controlled fury. Some of those kids would be adults now. This is bigger than we thought. Tommy Villanueva? Looks like he's in there. We'll need to verify, but... Jay nodded. His mother deserves answers. She deserves more than answers. Victor looked at the cottage, this place of horrors hidden behind a civilized facade. She deserves justice. She'll get it. They all will. Jay glanced at Alexis, who'd sunk to her knees on the ground, sobbing. What about your wife? I don't know yet, Victor admitted. First, Danny. Everything else comes after. They drove to Johns Hopkins, where a pediatric crisis team was waiting. As doctors examined Danny, as specialists began the careful work of documenting trauma and beginning the long healing process, Victor sat in a waiting room and finally allowed himself to shake. He'd done it. Against men with power, with connections, with decades of practice at evading consequences, he'd done it. But the cost. His phone buzzed. A text from Jay. Media's already picking up the story. FBI raids retired federal judge's property, finds evidence of child abuse ring. You're going to be famous. Victor didn't want fame. He wanted his son to be okay. He wanted to turn back time and prevent any of this from happening. He wanted Mr. Lyons? The doctor was young, probably fresh from residency, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. Danny's doing well, physically. No signs of sexual abuse, which is good news. But there's definitely psychological trauma. He's going to need extensive therapy. Whatever it takes, Victor said. Money's no object. There's something else. The doctor hesitated. Danny keeps asking about a car. Says it's his superhero signal, and he wants to keep it. We found it in his pocket. It's a GPS tracker. Victor nodded. I gave it to him. So he'd feel safe, have a way to call for help. That device probably saved his life. The doctor's expression was admiring. The way you handled this, the way you prepared him, a lot of parents would have just confronted the abuser directly, caused a scene, lost all chance of building a case. You played it smart. I played it like someone who knows the system, Victor corrected. Who knows that righteous anger isn't enough, that you need evidence and strategy and patience. He paused. My mother tried to report abuse when I was Danny's age. She had no proof, no documentation, just her word against my stepfather's. Guess who the cops believed? Understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes. So you made sure history wouldn't repeat itself. I made sure my son would be believed, that the men who hurt him would face consequences. Victor stood. Can I see him now? Danny was in a private room, clutching the tracker like it was made of gold. When Victor entered, his son's face lit up, the first real expression Victor had seen in weeks. Daddy, you came. The doctors said you were waiting, and I told them you promised, and you always keep your promises. Victor gathered his son close, feeling the small body relax against him. Always, champ. Always. Did the superhero signal work? It worked perfectly. You were so brave, Danny. So incredibly brave. I was scared, Danny admitted. Grandpa was mad when I pressed it. He said I was being bad, that I'd ruined everything. But you said to be brave, so I was. What did Grandpa do? Victor asked carefully, knowing he needed to gather information but not wanting to traumatize Danny further. Before the signal, Danny's face clouded. He took me to the place. The one I told you about. Said we were going to play games with Uncle Herbert and Uncle Luther. But it wasn't fun games. They wanted to take pictures of me without clothes. Said it was normal, that all boys did it. His voice dropped to a whisper. But it didn't feel normal. It felt bad. Victor's vision tunneled with rage, but he kept his voice gentle. You did exactly the right thing, buddy. Pressing that signal, telling me how you felt. Adults should never ask kids to do things that feel bad, even if they say it's normal. That's what you said before. That's why I pressed it. Danny looked up with those enormous brown eyes. Are you going to be in trouble? Grandpa said you'd get arrested if I told anyone. Grandpa lied. I'm not in trouble. He is. Good. The fierceness in Danny's voice was startling. I don't want to see him anymore. Not ever. You won't have to, Victor promised. I'll make sure of it. Over the next hours, more details emerged. The FBI found 43 victims documented in Reginald's files, spanning 3 decades. Some were now adults, some had moved away, some had died. Tommy Villanueva's case revealed he'd been killed trying to escape and his body buried on the property. The scope of the conspiracy widened to include not just Reginald, Herbert, and Luther, but 6 other men, all prominent in Baltimore's legal and political circles. By evening, the story had exploded across national news. Retired judge arrested in decades-long child abuse ring. FBI raids uncover horror in Baltimore estate. Father's heroic investigation brings down powerful predators. Victor refused all interview requests. His focus was Danny, helping his son begin to process trauma with the help of the crisis team. But he did make one call, to Kelly Villanueva. They found him, he told her gently. They found Tommy. I'm so sorry. Her sobs echoed through the phone. But when she could speak again, her voice held something Victor recognized, the relief of finally knowing, of 15 years of wondering coming to an end. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing. I had to, Victor said. For my son. For yours. For all of them. That night, Alexis came to the hospital. She looked like she'd aged a decade in hours, eyes red from crying, face drawn. I need to talk to Danny, she said. No. Victor's voice was firm. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. He's my son. He's my son too. And he needs space from everyone connected to what happened. That includes you. Victor, please. I didn't know. Didn't you? He turned to face her fully. Be honest. You never suspected? Never wondered why Danny changed? Why he didn't want to go to your father's house anymore? Alexis's silence was answer enough. You chose your father over our son, Victor said quietly. Maybe not consciously. Maybe you couldn't let yourself see the truth because it was too horrible. But the result was the same. Danny suffered while you made excuses. I'll make it right, she said desperately. I'll do whatever it takes. What it takes is therapy. For you, for Danny, for our family. If we even still have a family. Victor's voice softened slightly. I loved you, Alexis. Part of me still does. But I don't know if I can forgive this. I don't know if Danny can. I'll wait, she said. However long it takes. I'll prove I can be better. Victor wanted to believe her. But trust, once shattered, was hard to rebuild. Especially when the cost of misplaced trust had been so high. 3 days later, Reginald Moran made his first court appearance. No longer the judge, now the defendant. Victor watched from the gallery as the man who'd once wielded power with impunity stood before a judge. Not one of his poker buddies, but a federal appointee with a reputation for harsh sentencing. The charges read out were staggering. Child abuse, child pornography, kidnapping, conspiracy, murder in the death of Tommy Villanueva. And those were just the federal charges. State prosecutors were lining up with their own cases. Reginald's expensive lawyers argued for bail. The judge denied it without hesitation. The defendant has shown himself to be a danger to the community, particularly to children. He has extensive resources and connections that could facilitate flight. Bail is denied. As Reginald was led away in shackles, he turned and locked eyes with Victor. No more masks. No more civility. Just pure hatred. Victor stared back, unflinching. You lose, his expression said. After 30 years of winning, you finally lose. The investigation expanded. Sean Dillon was arrested for obstruction of justice. 2 Baltimore PD officers who'd helped cover up previous allegations faced charges. The poker group's other members lawyered up, but the FBI had the files, evidence of participation, of knowledge, of complicity. Media descended on Baltimore like locusts. Victor's face was plastered across every news channel. The father who brought down a predator ring. Reporters camped outside his house, shouting questions, asking for exclusive interviews. He ignored them all. His focus was Danny, helping his son navigate the aftermath. The nightmares that came every night. The panic attacks triggered by seemingly random things. The slow, painful process of rebuilding a sense of safety. But there were bright spots too. Danny started drawing again, something he'd stopped weeks ago. His pictures were dark at first, shadowy figures, locked rooms, fear given form on paper. But gradually, they changed. Superheroes defeating villains. Families safe together. Hope creeping back into the images. My therapist says drawing helps me process, Danny explained one afternoon, adding cape to his stick figure hero. This is you, Daddy. You're the strongest superhero. I'm not a superhero champ. Just a dad who loves you. Same thing, Danny said with the absolute certainty of childhood. You saved me. Like Batman saves Gotham. 2 weeks after the arrests, Jay Heath visited with an update. We've identified all 43 victims. 26 are still alive. Most are adults now, some are teenagers. All of them want to testify. That's good, Victor said. The more voices, the harder it is for anyone to dismiss this as exaggeration. There's something else. Jay hesitated. We found evidence that suggests this goes beyond Baltimore. Connections to similar operations in 3 other cities. The federal prosecutors are talking about this being a RICO case. Organized criminal activity spanning decades and state lines. Victor felt sick. How deep does this go? We don't know yet. But your investigation, the files you compiled, the pattern you found, it's become the blueprint for a much larger operation. FBI offices in 4 states are using your methodology to identify similar predator rings. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Victor just felt tired. How many children had suffered while men like Reginald operated with impunity? How many families had been destroyed? There's going to be a congressional hearing, Jay continued, about systemic failures in protecting children from abuse by powerful figures. They want you to testify. Will it help? It might. It might lead to reforms, better oversight, mandatory reporting systems that can't be manipulated by connected offenders. Jay paused. Or it might just be politicians grandstanding. But either way, your voice could make a difference. Victor thought about it. Thought about Tommy Villanueva's mother, finally able to bury her son. Thought about the 26 survivors who'd lived with trauma for years, believing they'd never see justice. Thought about Danny, who'd need to know, someday, that his trauma had meaning, that it had led to change. I'll testify, he said. But only if Danny's ready. I won't make him relive this for public consumption. Understood. We'll keep him out of it as much as possible. That evening, Victor sat with Danny as the boy got ready for bed. The nightlight was on. Danny needed it now. Needed to see every corner of the room before he could sleep. Daddy. Danny's voice was small. Will Grandpa ever get out of jail? No, buddy. Not ever. Promise. I promise. The judge gave him a sentence that means he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. Danny nodded, processing. What about Mommy? It was the question Victor had been dreading. Mommy's at Grandma's house. She's trying to understand what happened, trying to get better. Is she bad like Grandpa? No, champ. Mommy made mistakes. She didn't listen when you tried to tell her you were scared. But she's not bad like Grandpa. She's just confused. And hurt. I'm hurt too, Danny said simply. I know. And that's okay. You're allowed to be hurt. and you're allowed to be angry, and you're allowed to need time before you see her again. Do you still love Mommy? Victor chose his words carefully. I love the person she was when we got married. I'm not sure I love the person she became when she chose to ignore what was happening to you. But people can change, can grow. We'll see if she does. It was the most honest answer he could give. Danny seemed to accept it, snuggling into his pillow with the GPS tracker, his superhero signal, still clutched in one small hand. Daddy? If I have nightmares, will you come? Every time, champ. I'm right down the hall. All you have to do is call. As Danny drifted off, Victor sat in the doorway, watching his son sleep. The boy's face was peaceful now, the tension that had marked it for weeks finally easing. Not healed. Healing would take years. But safe. Protected. Victor's phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. This is Kelly Villanueva. I wanted you to know, we buried Tommy today. Thank you for bringing my baby home. Another message, this one from a journalist. Mr. Lyons, I'm writing a book about institutional failure in child protection. Your story is powerful. Would you consider an interview? Another from the Child Advocacy Center. Victor, we understand if you need time, but when you're ready, we'd like you to come back. We need someone like you leading investigations. Victor set the phone aside. Decisions for another day. Tonight was just about being here, being present, being the father Danny needed. But he couldn't help thinking about what came next. The trial would take months, maybe years. The media attention would fade eventually. Life would find a new normal. And Victor would have to decide. Go back to the center, knowing it had been compromised? Testify before Congress and become a public figure? Write that book and help other parents recognize the signs? Or just be a father? Just focus on Danny, on helping him heal, on rebuilding whatever could be rebuilt of their family. Tomorrow's problems, he decided. Tonight, his son was safe. The monsters were locked away. And for the first time in weeks, Victor Lyons could breathe without the weight of secrets crushing his chest. He'd won. Not in the triumphant way of movies, not with everything tied up in neat bows. But he'd won the only thing that mattered, his son's safety, his son's future, his son's chance at a life not defined by trauma. Everything else was just details. 6 months later, Victor stood in a federal courtroom as Reginald Moran received his sentence. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. Herbert Kim got the same. Luther Walsh, who'd cooperated and provided evidence about the larger network, got 25 years, still effectively a life sentence for a man his age. The survivors were there. Not all 43, but enough to fill the courtroom. Young men and women who'd carried these secrets for years, who'd been told they'd never be believed, who'd learned that justice was just a word powerful men used to protect themselves. Until now, when the judge's gavel fell, declaring the sentences final, the courtroom erupted. Some cried, some cheered, some just sat in stunned silence, processing that it was finally over. Victor felt Danny's hand slip into his. His son had insisted on being there, wanted to see the ending of the story. The therapist had agreed. Closure, she'd said, was important. Is it really over, Daddy? Yeah, champ. It's really over. Outside the courthouse, Kelly Villanueva waited. She'd attended every hearing, watched her son's killer face justice. Now she approached Victor, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said, for not giving up, for believing when everyone else told you to let it go. I couldn't let it go, Victor said simply. Not when it was my son. Not when I knew what you'd been through. She hugged him, this stranger bound by shared trauma, shared victory. They'll remember you, she said. All the survivors, all the families. They'll remember that one person stood up when it mattered. But Victor didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be normal. He wanted Danny to be normal. He wanted the story to end so they could begin living something new. Alexis had filed for divorce 3 months ago. She'd spent the time in intensive therapy, confronting her denial, her complicity through willful ignorance. She'd written Danny letters, not excuses, just acknowledgement of her failures and hopes that someday he might forgive her. Danny had read them. He hadn't responded yet, but he'd kept them, tucked in a drawer with his other important things. That, the therapist said, was progress. Victor had returned to the Child Advocacy Center, but in a new role, Director of Investigations, with authority to overhaul procedures, implement new oversight protocols, ensure no one like Sean Dillon could ever compromise their work again. He'd built a team he trusted, trained them in the methodology he'd developed, the patient gathering of evidence that couldn't be dismissed. The congressional hearing had happened. Victor had testified for 3 hours, laying out the systemic failures that allowed men like Reginald to operate for decades. Some of his recommendations had been adopted, others had been ignored, but seeds had been planted. And now, standing outside the courthouse with Danny's hand in his, Victor allowed himself a moment of pride. Not for being a hero, he'd never wanted that, but for doing what needed to be done, for trusting his instincts when everyone told him he was wrong, for protecting his son when the cost could have been everything. "Can we get ice cream?" Danny asked, ever practical about what really mattered to 7-year-olds. "Yeah, buddy, we can get ice cream." As they walked toward Victor's car, past reporters and cameras, and people wanting to congratulate him, Victor thought about the journey. From that morning Danny refused breakfast to this moment of closure. From suspicion to investigation to confrontation to justice. It hadn't been clean. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments he'd doubted himself, moments he'd wondered if he was crazy, if his trauma history was making him paranoid. But he'd trusted the evidence. He'd trusted his son, and that had made all the difference. The book came out a year later, not written by Victor, but about him. The Investigation: How One Father Brought Down a Child Abuse Ring. It became a bestseller, spawned a documentary, inspired other parents to trust their instincts. Victor did a handful of interviews, always bringing the focus back to the survivors, to systemic change, to the work still needed. Then he retreated from the spotlight, back to his life with Danny, back to his work at the center. Danny thrived. The nightmares became less frequent. The panic attacks faded. He started sleeping without the nightlight. One day, he put the GPS tracker in a drawer, no longer needing it as a talisman of safety, but keeping it as a reminder of the day his father had saved him. He also, slowly, began rebuilding a relationship with Alexis. She'd moved to a new city, started a new career, continued her therapy. She'd accepted that she'd lost her marriage, possibly lost her son's trust, definitely lost the life she'd built. But she was trying to become someone better. Danny started video calls with her, supervised at first, then gradually more independent. He was cautious, guarded, but he was trying too. Forgiveness, the therapist said, wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing the poison of hatred so it didn't consume you. Victor watched his son grow, become stronger, become more resilient. The trauma would always be part of Danny's story, but it wouldn't be the whole story. There would be joy too, and laughter, and love. On Danny's 9th birthday, 2 years after that terrible day in the cottage, they went to the park. Just the two of them, flying a kite on a perfect spring day. Danny was running through the grass, face upturned to watch the kite dance, laughing with pure delight. "Daddy, look, it's going so high." Victor watched his son, this incredible, brave, resilient kid who'd survived something unthinkable and was still capable of joy. And he thought about all the things that had to align perfectly for them to reach this moment. The suspicions he'd trusted, the investigation he'd built, the trap he'd set, the recording that had captured everything, the FBI's perfect timing. Any one element gone differently, and they might not be here. Danny might still be suffering. Reginald might still be free. But they were here. The monsters were caged. And Danny was flying a kite, laughing, healing. "I see it, champ." Victor called back. "You're doing great." And in that moment, watching his son reclaim his childhood, Victor knew. All of it, every terrifying moment, every difficult choice, every night spent planning and preparing and praying he wasn't wrong. It had been worth it. Because Danny was safe. Because justice had been served. Because evil, for once, had lost. And that, Victor thought as Danny ran back to him, breathless and beaming, was victory enough for any father. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.